Death Smiles gets into the mind of a serial killer.
Peter Kooten.
I'm sorry?
Peter Kooten.
Peter Curtin?
Yeah.
Should I start again?
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, I'm just saying it's Kooten. That's how you say it in German. Peter Kooten.
Okay. And it's kind of from the outside in, though.
Yeah.
It's not as if it's from simply his perspective, although it has these different breaks that is almost as if he's breaking into the poem. The pleasures of nine, that other thing called hell, such stolid profusion, final perversion. And it's getting into the mind of a despicable character. This is an example of what you were speaking about earlier, which is you don't just want to stick with characters that you agree with. You want to have a despicable serial killer and get into his mind and not simply say why murder is bad, but show why it is and show why this character is as brutal as he is in such a fashion.
Yeah, and just so you know, the real Peter Kooten, he got off on. They caught him, I think, in one of the prison yards, beheading swans and then trying to suck out the blood from the neck of a swan as it gushed into his mouth. So this was a real sick bastard. Now, a lot of people write about, you have these true crime writers, and a lot of people write about these serial killers or Al Capone or terrorists or whatnot. And a lot of people say, well, you're just exploiting them or whatnot. And most of the time they're actually right. It's just cheap exploitation. But it's also exploitive if you're just going to do a poem to show, oh, this is a bad person. The reason for this poem exists is not that to say that this mass murder, this serial killer from Dusseldorf, was a bad person. Why? You want to get in. You want to experience that, because if you can experience and get even momentarily behind the eyes, as I say, of this serial killer person, seemingly looking back after he's been guillotined, and that gets back to the swan thing. I mentioned that, but and if you Googled Peter Kooten, I think it was called The Vampire or The Monster of Dusseldorf. You, if you get behind there, you get a little glimmer into life. If you want to know why we have a society that, as in the faith poem, we have deaf and dumb people in charge of the justice system, just look at someone like a Kooten, someone like a Peter Kooten or a Bella Kiss, who we mentioned, or an Al Capone. If we had a society that, and I'm not saying that everyone has to be mollycoddled, but one of the things is a lot of these people derange like this because no one cares. A lot of people are put into situations. I've had personal things happen to me in the last year that rage against me, but I'm not going to go around and do a Columbine thing where I'm going to get vengeance on the people who have wronged me. But there are people like a Peter Kooten who would, and they may not do it when they're little and they can't fight back. They may wait until they're older. And so when you get something like the end here, then he saw his error, smiled, knowing he would never hear the blood noir from the gape of his neck. He also famously said the one thing he wants to hear is the sound of his neck being cut by the guillotine. He said that would give him an erection or something. Final perversion. The final perversion is that when he's dead, he doesn't have a memory in his afterlife of hearing his own death, the cut of his head. So this is one of those poems that if you don't know who Kooten was, and if this was written 50 years ago, it would not necessarily have an impact. But if you're reading this and you just look up Peter Kooten, type it in, and you read these things, wow, this is interesting how it plays. It gives you, again, an insight into a small reason of how a person can go wrong. And I don't have to say that a guy who's murdered people and wants to bite off the heads of swans and wants to hear his own neck, his own head being severed, is a bad person. No fucking shit. But what brought that person to this level? And when you hear at 12, the climax of sheep as he fucked them dead, he was also known as literally a sheep fucker. Then dreams of poisoning the local reservoir, another biographical fact. To see the masses prone in the streets might assuage. The unified moment, that other thing called hell. Well, unified moment, this gets back to a philosophical concept that all things all moment is one, that we live in a block universe. And I could get into more philosophical things here, but I don't want to do future critics' job all for them. So there's a lot more going on in this poem than simply saying that this serial killer is bad. Why do so few writers or artists do this? Why must everything be put out onto a simplistic banner? I even let's say if you didn't get the things that I just said about this poem, you're going to get something a little bit more. You're at least going to have the knowledge that, oh, Dan is attempting to tell me something more. Let me look into it. Most artists don't do that. They don't engage you to even come out of yourself. I want you as the reader to come out of your little world, let's say. And I'm not assuming that you're a small person shivering in a corner, but I want you to come out beyond where you are, to understand me, perhaps to a small degree, but more importantly about where my focus is on. Whether you're reading a 2.5 million page novel that I wrote, or you're reading a 14-line sonnet that I wrote, move beyond yourself a little bit. Understand a little bit more about yourself when you do, because you will have that parallax of, oh, I was here at this point, now I'm at this point. Let me look at the thing that's in the middle here. And that little parallax may give you an insight into something totally different.
Many of your poems use that device too, where you will take a subject and then you'll add, you'll talk about the stars, or you'll talk about a cosmic vortex somewhere, or
Yeah.
you'll talk about, a black hole, something that is larger than the character themselves.
I,
And it's always put into cosmic proportions, where this little insect is here, and then out there exists the whole universe. And
there,
that's something that is apparent in most of your prose. And it
there's
shows
there's
the grandeur as well as gets into the microscopic mind of this character. And to all the PC elitists out there who will always write about why murder is bad, this is a better example and a more damning indictment of a character to show exactly why he's a sick fuck than just simply stating the obvious about him being a murderer and why murder is bad.
if
So this is something that PC elitists should understand culturally, that if you immortally push someone into this character portrait that shows what a sick fuck he is and does it greatly, that's a far better indictment of his evil than simply stating the obvious.
um, you probably read my sonnet, Triceratops Heard Running. I start one of my novels of place. It's one of, I forget which one, but it's when I do a series of short stories on a place, and so I call them novels of place. I start one of the novels, the first short story. I start the first half of it is about dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs are doing something. They're running or something. I think it might be Triceratops again, or it might be Stegosaurs or something. But then I meld it into the story, and it acts as a de facto beginning to that chapter in the story, because you want to have that, just like Malik failed in Tree of Life when he tried to get that the 2001 like scene in the middle, but you want to get outside it. Like I said, I have a scene in A Norwegian in the Family where Andy Warhol and the character of Bit von Rheingold are in a hospital room, and the fly is there, and he goes off. There's a great scene in a film called This Sporting Life that I reviewed with Richard Harris, where he's in a hospital room, and I forget who he's visiting, but he's angry, and he sees a little spider crawling up above the bed of the person that he's visiting, and he's looking at it for 2 or 3 minutes, I think, maybe a minute and a half or so, and you wonder what he's going to do. This whole film devolves down to the sense, what's he going to do? And then boom, he punches his fist through the wall where the spider is, and it's a way to get an insight into the character, because until we know that the character in that film is violent, but until we see that he punches his hole to that, we don't really know how constrained he is, and that one act adds a layer to the rest of the film. And it's a brilliant film. It was Lindsay Anderson's first film, and it's a brilliant performance. It's one of the best performances. It's a top 10 or top 20 performance in acting, and it's Richard Harris was brilliant in it. But those are the kinds of moments that you want in art, and that's why I do something like A Death Smiles. And I don't do the same thing if I do on other killers or whatnot. You can't just do the same kind of aha moment. You have to do it in different ways. So I try not to repeat myself.